What's wrong with you? Do you ever just think that maybe you should, I don't know, just be normal for a moment? You know, some of you quirky little kids, you really ride my goat. You really make my gears turn. But it's not my fault as a parent. As your guardian, it's not my fault that you turned out so wretched, so deplorable. You are the reason for the fall of the West. Judeo-Christian Western culture would have been better off if it was just boomers and Gen Xers just giving birth to each other over and over again rather than you. But who are you?
We've got to have money.
You, my little audience, you person who's watching this silly little video, you are a Gen Zer, also known as a Zoomer, as some of you like to call yourselves, and also don't. You know, sometimes you complain about all sorts of things. You just don't stop complaining, do you? Oh no, the global financial crisis. Oh no, the climate is changing. I'm scared I'm gonna get shot and yous have a lot of problems. A lot of problems that I refuse to take responsibility for because I, as an individual, didn't do any of it. But there are a bunch of different things that seem to be keeping you from the faith, amongst other stuff. And I don't understand. So I read a book. I read a book with a big fat Z on the front of it. According to Barna Report, whoever that is, there are a variety of things that keep you, the Zooms, away from the faith. Let's diagnose who you are for a moment. According to Barna, some of the defining characteristics of you is your dependency, your practical addiction, technology, your social medias, that the internet is at the core of Gen Z's development, a uniquely powerful influence on their worldview. Very interesting. It impacts your mental health, your daily schedule, sleeping patterns, relationships, amongst other things. You also have a funny, funky little worldview that is highly inclusive and individualistic. Inclusive, ironically, is actually not very inclusive, actually. In your attempts to be inclusive, you actually make me feel not included. Have you ever heard of Ben Shapiro? You should go check him out. You're a diverse group of people. The most diverse generation so far. You got all sorts of white peoples and brown peoples and black peoples. Very diverse range ethnically and ideologically apparently also quite diverse. Amongst other things, it's a very diverse one. Makes me uncomfortable. Makes me feel like my good old-fashioned values are going to be replaced. Oh no, 2016 moment. American Psycho moment. Hey Paul Allen, which Gen Z is not a monolith. The thing is, with being so diverse along all these options, whether it's ethnicity, blah blah blah, pick your thing, a lot of the things that might be discussed in this video only really apply to certain groups within the generation and cannot be applied to the generation broadly speaking. However, hopefully what we'll be able to talk about will resonate with some of you, and maybe some of you will be able to say, hey yo, hey, that's me. He's talking about me, guys. And who knows? Maybe we'll form a little unhealthy parasocial bond in the midst of it all. But as I've just diagnosed you, and now we all know who you are, what is keeping you from the faith? According to Barna, again, the thing that keeps you, little Zoomer, away from the faith more than anything else seems to be that you have a hard time believing that a good God would allow so much evil and suffering in the world. Some might say this problem could have been exacerbated by the sad lung disease that was going on, particularly in 2020, as this book came out in 2018. So by now, the data could be a little outdated. A lot happened between those years. After all, when sad lung disease came out and really showed what it was all about, we suddenly became very isolated, and it's interesting to notice that social media really does funky things. It really makes you depressed. You're one of the saddest, most depressed, anxious generations so far. And social media makes that problem worse because of how it isolates you. Not just in how it isolates you, but also in respect to how it makes you feel as though you are missing out. This is called FOMO, fear of missing out. You might have heard people talking about this, but generally speaking, when you see a funky little photo on Instagram of all your friends hanging out and doing fun things, you might have been okay with the idea of knowing that your friends were hanging out, but when you see pictures of it on social media and you know that you're not there, you feel something. You feel pain in here. And that's FOMO. So when you're isolated into your little home because you couldn't leave it anymore because big government, bad, you have no one to connect with. And social media is the only way for you to have any kind of sense of community. However, if we want to go beyond just talking about big old vampiric companies that just want to take advantage of you for the sake of profiteering, then we can also look at just the world broadly speaking. Yes, there have been a lot of suffering from the hands of humanity, whether it's from just straight up murder, which, hey, Paul Allen, or whether it's from all these greedy ass companies who straight up lie to your face about how bad their products are for you, or social media, which has remarkably damaging effects on the minds for those who get addicted to these platforms, with symptoms like FOMO as well as various other internalized problems like self-doubt issues or feelings of self-worthlessness and beauty struggles. And hey, them. Look at this guy over here. He's got a pretty good life, and he's interesting, and he's beautiful, and I'm none of those things. Yes, those are all problems that we struggle with. But at the same time, there's also all these other problems external to these, which are just problems with reality itself. Hey, you see this axe in my hand? You could be killed with it and just die. Death is a problem. Suffering is a problem. And we will all die. There's people that you love, and they will die. And you will suffer when it happens. Can a loving, good God, who really wants what is best for the world, exist simultaneous to the sheer amount of chaos, pandemonium, and death that we experience in the world? Sad lung disease killed a lot of people. And the world didn't react very well to it. And in fact, a lot of dudes were like, hey, it's not that big a deal, and then proceeded to die quickly. Can we reconcile with the idea that there seems to be this chaotic and deadly universe with a loving and good God? Many theologians say yes, me included, but the generation seems to struggle with that idea. But beyond evil and suffering, there are two more things that I want to cover with you. The second biggest thing keeping you from the faith is that Christians are hypocrites. That one's a funky one. That's interesting because it seems that for millennials, that is the biggest issue. But for you, it is only the second biggest issue. And sure, I have to imagine that this data is still somewhat out of date. I can only imagine things must have been exasperated from the sheer pandemania of the sad lung disease. If I were a Zoomer for a moment, if I was born in the late 90s at the very least, I would probably be thinking, it feels like dudes are wilding out all over the show. And that there is not necessarily a distinction between dudes of the world and dudes of the church in the severity of the wilding out. And yet Christians are supposed to talk a big game of ethical standards and morality and crap like that. How, you're supposed to reflect the goodness of God in your life and the way you go about. And yet when that doesn't happen, and instead, whilst you might still talk a big game of, good sexual ethic and, standing up for the poor and weak, when you hear all sorts of wacky stories about sexual cover-ups and misdeeds and scandal after scandal after scandal, you might be a little more convinced of the problem that maybe Christians just are hypocrites, and that maybe I don't want anything to do with that old faith that they call Christianity. Maybe I want to do my own thing, and I just do not want to associate with that community. After all, the stuff that we hear about and have been hearing about for the last few years, since the release of this book, I can't imagine has gotten better. What's interesting is in the next page, they finalize their little paragraph here by talking about how the current political issues, especially LGBTQ rights, poverty, and the immigration policies, may impact whether this perception holds as Gen Z gets older. Now, I find it funny that they ended the whole paragraph talking about politics, because
Christian nationalism.
Christian nationalism.
Christian nationalist.
Christian nationalism.
And there is no happy middle ground. There is no...
Uh-oh. You're a Christian nationalist.
we hear a lot about it, especially if you live on the internet. You might begin to think that this whole Christian nationalism thing is a big deal. And it's not like it's not. But if there was one thing that was going to keep me away from the faith, if I was one of you silly little Zetters, if I was one of you silly little Zoomers, screen ages, little spotty TikTokers, you know, as deplorable and disgusting as nationalism is in and of itself, the Christian nationalism might be enough to keep me away from the faith personally. And that is unfortunate when you compare it to Jesus himself, which, I mean, he couldn't be tied down to nation and kingdoms of this world. After all, if he could be tied down to a kingdom of this world, as he told to Pilate, hey yo, my followers would be killing yours. My followers would be coming out and attacking yours, but that's not the way it is. That is not the way that my kingdom works, because mine's not of this world, it's of another world. And in his kingdom, he dies on a cross, and that is not the way of Christian nationalism. You put your enemies on a cross, you don't get put on one. Is what I would say if I was a Zoomer. That would be embarrassing. As a Christian nationalist myself, oh boy, I love putting my enemies on crosses and then pretending as though I actually love my enemies. Third issue. The third issue is, I believe science refutes too much of the Bible. Now, there seems to be a conflation in your mind that Christianity is fairy tales and science is truth.
Obviously, we could talk about the Big Bang and how God didn't just poof us into existence. But even if you think, as some Christians do, that God created everything at once through the Big Bang, none of this makes sense. God created the heavens? That's a synonym for the universe. So God created the universe and Earth at the same time in the beginning. Except the universe is approximately 13.8 billion years old, and the Earth is only 4.5 billion years old. And if you rewind the tape, they don't have the same starting point. And if you know anything about the early universe, darkness wasn't in the picture. For hundreds of thousands of years after the Big Bang, the universe was really, really bright. And where does water come from that God was hovering over? It didn't have water until long after it was formed. It became the building. The universe didn't have rain.
Hey yo, Mr. White, science. If Jesse was from Brooklyn. But whilst I think a lot of the jargon that Friendly Atheist over here was smacking on about, to me a lot of that might have sounded silly, but I don't know, man. A lot of dudes have listened to the words that fly out of dudes like Ken Ham's mouth and hear stuff like, hey yo, you have to read the opening of Genesis very literally, and you can't take another position because, hey, if we can't trust the opening of Genesis, we can't trust the rest of the Bible.
Generations of our kids have been indoctrinated in the public schools in evolution, millions of years. They then come to their churches and they're told, you can believe that, don't worry about Genesis, trust in Jesus. When you give up Genesis 1 to 11, you give up the foundation of all doctrine.
And then when you don't believe the opening of Genesis, then the rest of the Bible falls through. Is there a struggle between science and the Bible? Well, for a lot of people, that seems to be the case. And in fact, your boy Friendly Atheist just went on a whole tangent about the first verse. And it's not just him and atheists like that. It's also, you know, a lot of Christians and a lot of dudes like Ken Ham, you know, Ken Ham moment. That there is, in fact, a dichotomy between, let's say, Genesis, because it always seems to be, and science. That if you accept the one, you can't accept the other. You necessarily can't accept the other because then you would be compromising, and if we compromise, then we can't have any of the Bible. It tends to be some of the argumentation used. Now, nice argument, but no, I'd like to talk about this more in the future, but if that is a problem that a lot of people face, if the idea that science seems to contradict the Bible, then we have to treat that problem seriously. Because we've already went on long enough, and all I wanted to do was discuss with you what the 3 biggest things that were getting in the way of Zoomers, Gen Zers. What is getting in the way of them and faith? It seems to be these 3 issues, according to a Barna report back in 2018. And my point is that reflecting on these three things, that since the sad lung disease came out, those issues must have gotten worse. I can't imagine that they've gotten much better. But I'm not a Zoomer. I'm Boomer / Gen Xer. I'm in my 40s, 50s, and 60s. I can't relate to you. I don't know what anything is that does the technologies these easies. But if I was a Zoomer, maybe these would be the biggest problems. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Please like and subscribe. I need as much support as I can in building my own parasocial community to destroy Western culture with. See you around, kiddos.